Hello, welcome to the Exhausted Programmer. My name is Alexander, and today we're talking about, well, a lot of things, but mostly piping data. So today's video is framed around the idea of creating a banner for whatever reason you might want in a Bash terminal, and then outside of a Bash terminal, as we'll see at the end of this video. But really the point of this is just to show more of what Bash can do and what knowing Bash and how that can help you do a lot of different things in problem solving. So please stick with this. It is quite a bit, but none of it is that deep. In a previous video, we took a look at a program called Figlet in order to make a clock for a script. Let's take a little bit closer look at that program. Figlet displays large characters made up of ordinary screen characters. And it allows you to specify a bunch of different fonts you can use. But how do we know what fonts are available to us? Well, if we scroll down a little bit, we see this, and it says the FLF suffix may be left off on the font file. If you want to know what font is being used, it's the -i3, which doesn't make a lot of sense because if you're giving it a font file, that's the font file that you're using. And if you're not giving it a font file, it's just going to use the standard font file. Instead, right below it, we have this font directory, which tells us that we can find out the default font directory with I2. And in here, we should see a list of all the fonts available. So let's take a look at what the default font directory is using the I2. User share Figlet. Also, if we continue down, we would see that there was other flags we could give it after the capital I, such as 5, which gives us the file formats that it can accept, FLF2, TLF2. But we want a list of files, so let's take a look at what's in that directory. We can ls it and see there's quite a lot here. If we continue to look through it though, we see that there's 3 file extensions found here, FLC, FLF, and TLF. 2 of those kind of match with what we saw before, and in the man pages it did specify FLF specifically, but our FLCs, do they work? Do we need a 2 at the end of these extensions for them to work? How can we figure this out? Well, let's just try it. Let's be a little scientific. Right here we have one of each, so we'll try each one of them, first with Moscow. And that does not work. Well, what about the TLF Paga? Hey, that does work and looks pretty cool. And then the final one, script. And there we go. And we have the 3 file extensions tried. 2 of them worked. And well, now the problem is that FLCs aren't all over here. There's a few mixed in elsewhere, and that isn't great for us. We want a list of all the possible fonts. Let's first start by listing out all the files. Well, ls here lists them all out, but they're in columns. But that's a little bit of a hand wavy thing that ls does. In fact, if you pipe ls output into anything else, such as cat, you'll see that it will put each file to its own line. And this is helpful for us because we want to start filtering this file line by line. Now, there is a simpler solution to this that I'll get to in just a minute, but my first step on this was I just want to sort by the extensions. It would be great if the extensions were at the beginning of the file. And so the first thing I did was to use this rev command, which reverses each line, line by line. And now we'll see that instead of mono9.tlf, it's flt.9 whatever. This isn't very readable, but what it allows us to do is then to sort this. And when we sort it, it's actually going to sort it in a way that all the extensions are together. So all the FLCs are at the top, FLFs in the middle, and TLFs at the bottom. Well, that's good that they're sorted, but now we want them to be readable. And that's as simple as just undoing the reverse. And there we go. Now they're sorted by file extensions, and they are readable. My plan at this point was to drop this into a file, like fonts, and then use Vim to go in and delete so many lines and get rid of the extensions. And as soon as that became my thing, I realized that these Vim commands are actually very common commands. They're not just with Vim. And a thing you can use is called Stream Editor, or sed. Sed allows us to alter data as it's going through. This is a very old program. I don't know when it was created, but I do remember someone talking about using something like sed back when punch cards were a thing, because as you're taking the data from the punch cards into the machine, you can maybe correct something editing the stream as it's going into the machine. I don't know if sed specifically was used for that, but that kind of concept is kind of what we're going to be using here. We're going to take the output, which is the ls directory, and now we're going to pipe it into sed, and we're going to tell it line by line to find the string flc, and then this $sign here tells it to match to the end of the line. So anywhere where the line ends with flc, not if flc is in the middle, it will find that, and then it'll run this command, which is to delete. And when we run this, well, all of our TLFs are still here, FLFs, but there are no FLCs here. I know some people with new things like this, maybe you don't trust it. I went through the effort of really making sure this works. Now the thing is like, where did this $sign concept come from? It comes from regular expressions. What can you do with regular expressions? Well, there is a man page for it. And specifically in section 7 of the man pages, so you have to do man 7 regex, we see that the $sign matches the null string at the end of a line. We're also going to be using the caret, which matches the null string at the beginning of a line a little bit. And next we're going to be using this bracket notation. And I think the easiest way of explaining what it does is to just use it. So we're going to take the same thing we did before, and now we're going to pipe it into sed again. And now we're giving it a function name called s, and this is for string replace. And the way these functions work is you have the function name, you have 2 slashes here, which gives you the first argument, and then another slash for the second argument. We're going to find this string. This string isn't that complicated. It looks a little messy, but the period or the dot means something in regular expressions, and so the backslash just says, hey, we want the actual dot, so it'll match this. And then the bracket notation, in this case, will say, look for a T or look for an F. So it'll look for a T, LF, or F, LF, and then the same $sign to say at the end of the line. And if you find that, this function is going to take this match and replace it with nothing. And when we do that, we'll see that all of our extensions went away. A side tangent, you don't have to call sed each time you run it. When you run it back to back, you can give it a semicolon to differentiate between 2 commands. So we still have the same first command here, the same second command here, and then the semicolon. If there is any difference, I don't specifically know what it is. This might be more optimized because it doesn't have to call sed, which would involve stacks and whatever. But instead, it just runs them back to back. The problem should be apparent though. This isn't extremely readable right now, and we're going to do more with it, and so it's going to become less readable as we make these longer and longer command arguments into sed. It does do the same thing, ultimately. Maybe it does it faster. I'm not 100% on that, but I would imagine it does, but that doesn't matter for us. Instead, we're going to break it apart to help it be more readable. We're also going to start putting things in their own line. And the way we can do this in bash is you put in a backslash, and then when you hit enter, it tells bash, hey, I'm not done, I'm still going on, and this can really help with readability. So if we hit enter here, again, we get the same thing because we're just giving it the same lines, but now it's maybe a little bit more readable. I think so. And as we go forward with more commands, it will be more readable to me, and it keeps the line lengths in check. If you ever wanted to take your history and pipe it into a text file to make a script real quick, having it already formatted could be very helpful. Okay, so we have the list of fonts, which could be helpful, but to use them now we'd have to type in the figlet, our string, and then give it the dash lowercase f, and then each one of these, and that could be redundant and tiresome. Instead, what if we made a script out of this font list? Well, we can use sed again to help that out. We can add to the beginning of each line with the stuff needed to make this into a valid command. The way this works is, again, with the string replace we saw before, we're going to find the beginning of the line. I showed that in the man pages earlier, but this caret symbol means the beginning of the line, and we're just going to put in figlet space $text space lowercase f, and then a space. And then remember, this just tells sed that this is the end of the argument. And when we run this, what we'll see is a list of commands that we could run. We could turn this into a file, make it executable, run it. But the problem is now it's just going to put each one on the screen really fast, and we're going to have to scroll up to see from the very beginning. And that could be kind of annoying. Instead, it would be nice if after each line, it just waited a second for us to hit enter to tell it that we want to go on to the next one. And we can do that using a simple little program called read. We can add this to the file, same way as we've done before. Instead of using the caret, we use the $ again. And at the end of the line, we're going to append a new line, read, and then the prompt is just an empty string. So it's just going to sit there and wait for us to hit enter. And there we go. It'll put out the text and then wait for the user input and then put out the next text, wait for the user input. One more problem. As we're going through this, how are we going to know which text is which? This is just going to put it to the screen. It's not going to tell us what we're using. Maybe we could have done something unique by using the name of the font for the string of the font. But what we're going to do is just echo out the name of the font and then do the rest. To make this work, we kind of have to edit the last two commands we did. But the first three are actually the same. So we output our list of files. We remove the ones that aren't font files. We remove the extensions. And here, using the string replace again, we're going to replace the entire string with the phrase echo space quotes. And then this ampersand just says whatever that line was before, put it here, close the quotes. So this will echo out the string of the name of the font. Then we're going to use a new line, do our figlet command, and then this again will put the whole line of the text, which was just, Y term here, or shadow, or slant. It'll put that there, new line, read. So let's run this, and there we go. Weird space there. I know why that's there, but please ignore that. It has to do with some background stuff, which will become clear in a future video. Now we'll echo, we'll have the text, and we'll wait for the user to hit enter before we go on the next one. And we can run this. In order to run this, save it to a file first, which is as simple as using the arrow line there, and that will save it to a file. If you use one, it will either create or overwrite the file if it exists. If you use two arrows, it will append to the file or create it if it doesn't exist. Of course, we just want this as a file, so this is pretty simple. And there it goes. In order to run it, we have to do it a little bit differently than we've done before. Of course, first we have to make it executable. In times past, we would run stuff with / in the script name. The problem with that is that will run it in its own shell. That is, it will sort of create a new bash session and it will run it. We are using this text variable here and we need to define it. So let's go ahead and define it now. But if we run it in its own shell, it won't have the definition that is in this shell. Instead, we can run it a slightly different way with source. And there is a shortcut where you can just give it a .font. If you've seen that before, this is the same thing. And what this does is it runs the script inside this session. So the definition of text is defined. So now when we run this, there we go. We see that the ASCII 12 text looks like this. 9 looks like this. Banner, big ASCII, big mono, block, and all of these. Some of these don't load in my terminal, but this isn't a problem with Figlet or Bash. This is the problem with my terminal and maybe Windows. I don't know. I could dig into it, but I didn't think it was worth it for this video. We can keep going, get through all these. And then we get down to terminal and then Y terminal, which again doesn't really work. And we see that some of these didn't really work either, but that's okay. Again, that's a problem with the terminal. That's a whole nother thing. And we have an example of each one of our fonts. And yes, having a bubbly text or whatever inside of your terminal can be useful. And I've used it in previous videos. Again, making a clock with Figlet is a pretty simple thing to do. But what if we want to do more? Well, if we go back to the man pages of Figlet, we actually see very early on, it mentions toilet. So it says that there is Figlet fonts and there are toilet fonts. Well, what is toilet? It is another program. And here we see that it displays large, colorful characters. So that's a little bit different because Figlet doesn't seem to support colors. Here we give it fonts with the same -F flag, and it tells us it can use FLF or TLF files. It also just tells us where the directory is, so we don't have to run some sort of I flag to get that out of there. I'm sure there's a problem with this in that if it ever changes and the document doesn't update, the documentation becomes wrong. Very common problem with documentation is that documentation can lie over time as things change without being documented. But in this case, we know that this is actually where it's at. Well, since it uses the same flag, we can give it the same command, that is toilet-f in the font name. So why don't we change our script to replace figlet with toilet, because we've used sed to do that already with string replace. And if we do this, well, it looks like it worked. All the figlets are now toilet. The problem is that the stream editor edits streams. So if we actually cat out the file, we'll see that, nope, it's still figlet. And that might be frustrating. Sed can edit in place with the -i flag. The way this works is you give it the -i flag, the command, and the file name. And when you do this, nothing comes to the screen because there's no stream to edit. But if we actually look at the file, we see that toilet is there instead. And if we run the file, we'll get the same output as before, which I'm going to spam through to get to the end. They all look the same. They all don't load where they didn't load before. There's no real difference here because it's the same font files as before. But the man pages mention specifically color, and none of these had color. And why is that? Well, color is added through toilet using what they call filters, and we can find the list of filters by giving it the filter flag and the word list. And here we see a bunch of filters. And of course we can just try these out. If we want it to be rainbow, we can give it the gay filter, which makes it the rainbow. We can give it a border. Yes, you can chain these together. If you wanted the border to also have the color, you just gotta make sure you do it in the right order. Order matters. So if we do border first, then the border will be colored in when everything else is colored in. And we can add to this and make it go 180 if we wanted to. But let's clean this up a little bit, use better readability, and let's get rid of the 180. So we'll break it down. You can break down even single commands into multiple lines. We'll use this font, this filter, and this filter. And with this, we'll get that. But toilet does something else that is worth mentioning at this point. You can export this output in different ways. Obviously, this is, ASCII available or whatever, but you can export it in other ways, making it UTF-8 or any of these others. But the one that caught my eye was SVG because I know a little bit about graphics, and I know SVG can be used in things like image editors, the GNU image editor, GIMP. And to use it, all you have to do is just give it the flag and what you want it to export as. So export as SVG, and when we run this, well, instead of getting the colorful output, we get that mess. And that's okay. We can just save that to a file if we want to. And there we go. I do have a plan on what to do with this, so I want to do one more, one that's a little bit smaller and doesn't have the colors, that's just black and white, or seemingly black and white. This. And let's go ahead and make this into a SVG as well. You see that the colors do come through, which is great. And for the other one, which I'll go ahead and open now, we'll see the grayscale right there. Now at this point, I can go in and edit it to make it exactly black and white. That is, have only two colors. Export it as a PNG. Logo.png. Just export it, and then with a little bit of work in Blender, I can turn it into this, a logo spinning, just with some free software and piping from Bash, and then creating a further pipeline through GIMP into Blender. Now, just to be clear, I don't expect this channel to become all about things like GIMP and Blender. Those are just little side things you can research on your own to create a simple animation like I did. In fact, I don't know Blender so well that I couldn't actually make that into a movie file. When I tried, it just kind of broke my system, but I can have it rotate in the window itself. If you have any other questions about this topic or any other topics of this channel, please feel free to drop a comment below. If you liked what you saw, like this video, subscribe, all those nice things. And again, thank you for watching.